Hi, everybody. I hope you're all well and calm so that we can continue with Spare without losing our marbles. Harold starts part 31 talking about how he dreamt about his mother's reappearance and not only dreamed about it, but also thought consciously about it during the day. In part 32, he concentrated again on his drug use at Eton and how him and his mates would smoke weed in a bathroom. He tells how he darted out of the bathroom and encountered a fox outside, how he had a conversation with the fox, and like with the leopard, he felt that the fox was a messenger from another realm. In 33, he talks about the infamous basement at Highgrove, which had originally been a bomb shelter, but which they had turned into Club H. H not being for Harry, but for Highgrove. He describes how they kitted it out, drinks trolley and all, which they kept stocked through creative borrowing. Never mind. But Club H wasn't just for raucous parties. It was also where Harold and William went to listen to music and play games, etc. Then he talks about a visit from Marco. He thought that Marco and the royal family found out about the older woman. Yes, the infamous story of riding her, and then she smacked his rump and sent him off to graze like a horse. But it wasn't about that. According to Harold, a story had leaked to one of Britain's biggest tabloids. But the editor had the sense to approach the palace. Marco was there to confront Harold with each piece of evidence the editor had. Harold denied it all. Marco said he'll try to convince the editor that it is all false, but she did not fall for it. She felt Harry and Marco were lying to her. She felt her evidence was strong, and a few days after the meeting, the front page blared it out to the world. In January 2002, Harry's drug shame was the headline. Over weeks, the story ran in the newspapers. Now, in Harold's words, the stories ran by the newspapers were all fabricated, but since the absolute beginning of the book, he told us of his smoking, drinking, and drug taking. So, what exactly did the newspaper fabricate? I don't really understand. And Harold doesn't say. Anyway, what stands out to me is how Harold talks about this female editor who had the decency to contact the palace first and not just run with the story. Yet Harold, now nearly 20 years later, calls Rebecca Brooks an infected pustule on the arse of humanity. A shit excuse for a journalist. Well, what a feminist Megan's husband is. I guess not. Instead, he is indeed a misogynist of the worst kind because he is definitely verbally abusive to women. And the jury is still out on whether he is or was physically abusive to women. And in another video, I will present you with an analysis of why I think Harold has been or still is physically abusive to women. Remember, it is my opinion. I am no doctor or psychiatrist. Then he goes into the death of Princess Margaret on February 2002, and shortly thereafter, the Queen Mother's death. Harold says he did not know Princess Margaret well at all, and one Christmas she gave him a rollerball pen with a fish wrapped around it. Now, here's where Harold tells how he was at Eton when he received a call from a courtier who said, "Your Royal Highness, the Queen Mother, has died." Except that this is not correct. Prince Charles, William, and Harold were on holiday at Cloisters when she passed away, and that I can prove to you by old newspaper reports and photographs. But of course, all this time, Harold had bigger issues than his great grandmother's death, and that, of course, is according to Harold. He was summoned to the office of one of the courtiers and asked whether he was also doing cocaine. He denied it, but according to this newspaper editor, they had photographs of him snorting cocaine. The editor was, however, willing to lock the photograph away on condition that he can sit down with Harold and talk to him about the danger of drug use. Harold would have none of it. As a matter of fact, he told the courtier to call the editor's bluff and deny that he was using cocaine and deny his request for a sit down with Harold. However, by his own admission, he was indeed snorting coke. The journalist never printed the photograph. Instead of being grateful, Harold thought he had won, and he was proud of himself. Harold then talks about the discussion he had with his father about his future, and they both agreed that university wasn't an option. Harold suggested working at a ski resort or going to Africa to become a safari guard, but Charles said no. Finally, they both agreed on the army, but first he was to have a gap year. 6 months in Australia and 6 months in Lesotho. But before Harold left, there was another tragedy. His friend, Hennes, died in a car accident. Remember, we heard about Hennes before, the other Henry. William and Harold went to the funeral. If Harold is telling the truth, his thoughts during and after the funeral are once again disturbing. And again, his delusion, his self centeredness, and growing petulance with a touch of narcissism is clear and so disturbing. The two young men weren't wearing seat belts, just like Mummy. Hennes wasn't going too fast, unlike Mummy, because Hennes wasn't being chased, etc., etc. I'm wondering how many of these thoughts Harry shared, and if so, with whom. As I'm reading, I can honestly see that Charles tried. He really did. In the next part, Harold writes him attending a play he was in and so on. But something was very wrong. Was Charles present but absent in his presence? In other words, there in body but not in soul? Or did the children's minders, nannies, and security cover up for Harold and kept things from Charles? I don't know, but it is clear, oh so clear, that there was something wrong with Harold. While I'm working through this book, yes, I'm calling it working and not just reading, I can pick up how screwed he was from an early age. I'm even going to guess that Diana knew something was wrong, but her own life was in turmoil, and Harold was still too young, and then she died. I think had she lived, Harold would have turned out exactly the same, with the difference being that Diana would have stepped up and got him help much sooner, and maybe the result of his illness would not have been so severe or so obvious. He talks about finishing at Eton and being accused of cheating. His frustration about Charles not allowing him to clear his name and basically telling him to ignore it. Harold then writes a long part about his time in Australia in the outback, working on the Hills farm, his first battles to adapt to the heat and work, but eventually he does. He also got a new nickname, Spike, after he was photographed with an, I don't know how to pronounce this animal's name, it's Echidna. But anyway, this animal was called Spike. He says his guards printed up t shirts with Spike 2003 on it. This sounds like a teensy weensy lie, but it's not important. So let's move on. He talks about the package, which usually arrived from England, filled with letters from his father, office paperwork, and briefs about charities. Now, I understand and I get the letters from Charles and maybe others, but at 18, what office work did he have? What charities was he involved in? Is he perhaps blowing up his own importance here, pretending he got his own red box just like the Queen? I think so. He talks about receiving the notes on the book Diana's former butler wrote called A Royal Duty. Allegedly, and according to Harold, he, Charles, and William were furious about it. The three of them issued a united condemnation. They publicly called for a meeting with Paul, and he answered them publicly and said he would welcome a meeting as he would love to give him a piece of his mind. The meeting never happened. According to Harold, the palace squashed it. Then, according to Harold, the Paps started sneaking onto the farm, and by the third one, he decided to leave. On his return to England, he started to frequent the clubs. One night, he met a girl. He says he did not know that she was a page 3 girl, a term used for girls appearing topless in one of the newspapers. He left the club and got into an unmarked vehicle, and as they pulled away, a Mercedes with blacked out windows jumped the curb and slammed into the rear passenger door. According to Harold, it happened because the driver was so busy trying to take photographs that he did not look where he was going. Harold complains that instead of the newspapers writing that Prince Harry nearly got killed by a reckless paparazzi, they wrote about Prince Harry meeting and kissing a page 3 girl. Harold leaves out a lot in this piece. Firstly, Harold arrived with his Australian friend George at about 1 a.m., and William was also there. Newspaper articles does not state whether William was there earlier or whether they all arrived together. But anyway, the model was Lauren Pope. Lauren is now a mom of two and very happy in her long-time relationship with Tony Ketterman. Try as I may, I could not find any record of this so-called near-fatal crash. So make of that what you will, but to me it sounds a little suspicious. A black Mercedes with blacked out windows, just like Mommy. Well, well, well. When I come back, we'll talk about Harold in Lesotho and meeting Chelsea Davy. So go make yourselves a nice cup of tea and meet me back here in an hour or two or three. And of course, as always, until then, take good care of yourself. Bye.